Let's go right quick. We're in chapter 9 of 1 Samuel. I'm going to back up just a little bit and kind of pick up to where we were. God's people, the nation of Israel, asked for a king. No, they didn't ask. They demanded to have a king. Wiersbe's comment, the greatest judgment God can give to us is to let us have our own way. And God said, okay, you can have a king, but he's going to come with a cost. Verse 11 in chapter 8 says that the king, this new king, will reign over you. This new king will claim his rights. In the next few verses, the key thing is take. He's going to take. This king's not going to give. He's going to take. Goes down through several things that he's going to take. Verse 18, chapter 8. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you on that day. That is in spite of all of the graphic warnings, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. The people refused to listen to God. Well, in chapter 9, the focus shifts from Samuel to Saul, God's choice for a king. Verse 1 talks about his father Kish, says he's a man of standing, which just means that he was a man that had a good reputation. And we think that Saul was part of a very strong, powerful, wealthy family. Family owned land, the family owned livestock, animals, had servants. Verse 2 says that Saul was tall, good-looking, strong, the kind of king that people would look up to, physically attractive. But I want to make a point and a reminder. Again, there is no indication in Saul's life, there's no indication that there was any kind of spiritual background. No indication whatsoever that Saul had any kind of spiritual upbringing. Saul's home was in Gibeath, only 5 miles from Ramoth, Samuel's home, but it seems as if Saul did not know. Seems as if Saul did not know the most spiritual man in Israel. Well, Saul was a farmer. And it might have been that he just simply stayed on the farm and minded his own business. And there's some merit to a good, hard-working person that just minds his own business. But we're going to see today that it took a very insignificant event to bring Saul and Samuel together. And what is that insignificant event? Donkeys. They were looking. Saul's father had lost his donkeys. We had a little homework from last week. Now, if we're going to talk about how important these donkeys were. So if you had a farmer that was desperately looking, sent his son out and his servant to look for donkeys. So what's our analogy today? You got a farmer today. What's of importance to him kind of on the same parallel as donkeys? Well, his pickup truck. In fact, my NIV footnotes says that donkeys were valuable. They were the pickup truck of biblical times. They weren't just considered something nice to have. They were a necessity, also a sign of wealth. To lose them was a disaster. Can you imagine a farmer today without a pickup? Can you imagine? Well, that was the situation. Kish, Saul's father, said, verse 3, take one of my servants, go and look for the donkeys. We look on ahead in verse 6, it seems as if Kish's servant, the one that went with Saul, knew of Samuel because he called him, in verse 6, a man of God. And he's the one that suggested that they go to Ramah and see if they could get Samuel to help him locate the donkeys. Verse 11, they get into Ramah. They're looking for Samuel, and they go up and they ask, is the seer here? Well, at this time, just a bit of an explanation. A prophet and a seer were pretty basically the same thing. Not too much later, there was a bit of a difference in between a seer and a prophet. A seer received visions from God, whereas a prophet foretold future events. But for this time, a seer and a prophet were pretty much the same thing. I'm going to read verses 15 and 16 in chapter 9. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and Saul was from Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hands of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. Verse 17, the Lord says to Samuel, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. And Saul and Samuel run together in Ramah. Saul is looking for the seer. It's still about the donkeys. Samuel says, I am the seer. Samuel invites Saul to eat with him. And in the morning, Samuel says, I'm going to send you on your way. Verse 19, and I will tell you all that is in your heart. Now, if somebody that you just met, that you're not really for sure spiritually who he is, you know, he's a seer, wouldn't that get your attention? Tomorrow, we're going to talk today, and tomorrow I'm going to tell you all that's in your heart. So, in other words, Samuel is going to answer all of Saul's questions. He's going to answer all of his questions. And, oh, by the way, the donkeys, don't worry about them. They have been found. So we have a shift because now the focus is on Saul. Verse 20 talks about his whole family line, calls Saul's family the desire of Israel, because that's where Israel's first king, or first earthly king, is going to come from. But Saul says, well, wait a minute. I'm a Benjamite, and I'm from the smallest tribe. How can you put that on? In fact, he says, why do you say such things about me? Being important, the desire of Israel, talking about my family line. Well, again, my NIV footnotes. Saul would struggle with God's call and with God's given mission. He would struggle with those. And we're going to see that Saul, in fact, we've already seen Saul is going to constantly battle jealousy, insecurity, arrogance, impulsiveness, deceit, and he's even going to battle this constant battle that we all have, being wholeheartedly committed to God. Is it any wonder that God was grooming David? That God was grooming David, a man after God's own heart. Verse 24, chapter 9. Saul dined with Samuel all day, and later on, they talked on the rooftop. The next morning, Samuel told Saul, send your servants on, verse 27, but you stay here for a while so that I may give you a message from God. Notice all of the times that Samuel said, we need to talk, we need to discuss. I need to let you know what's happening. That's the end of chapter 9. Your thoughts. What did we learn? Kind of ran through that pretty quickly this morning. What did you learn, and how do we apply that? But you didn't know the donkeys were pickup trucks.
Seer is a prophet. Of course, a prophet. The prophet that seers. Yeah, speak up because I can't hear you.
Mary's just saying prophet and seer, pretty close, pretty much. We're talking about at that time, and again, not going to be long till there's a little bit more of a division, but pretty much the same thing. We talked about a lot of things that Saul battled. Can y'all identify with any of those? And Saul was all over the board. You know, one day he was here, and then the next day he was here. Y'all have those same kind of battles in your life? Just battle with some things, Janet being constantly being wholeheartedly committed to God. Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to figure out. Now, I don't know that it mentioned too much about Saul being a faithful person at all. Besides being the tribe of Benjamin and being very, very tall, why was he chosen?
Janet asked a good question that I don't have a real strong answer unless God, for some reason or another, whether it was his attractiveness, and we're going to see even today, he had some natural abilities, some natural military abilities.
He was very humble to begin with.
I think so. Hey, I'm just a farmer.
But pride got in the way.
Oh,
yeah.
Pride. That thing that just seems to sneak around and catch all of us off guard. But Janet, I think we're going to kind of put the pieces of that puzzle together a little bit. But right now, he's pretty quiet and unassuming, good looking, attractive, physically. You know, there's some things that would make him attractive as a leader, as the people are looking to somebody with those characteristics. But I think we're going to see that come out a little bit more. Anyone else? Janet, that was kind of a loose answer. Does anyone else have a better reply? Why Saul? Why was Saul the first king of Israel?
Well, if he was selected by God, and Saul didn't have a choice not to be that there, and he was chosen, and he had to do what he was told, even though he didn't do what he was told, but still, I had a plan for him. And so he was human. God knew what he was from the beginning. But, you know, he wanted to test him. I think, and then, but like you said, he didn't have a spiritual background. And, you know, another thing is he wanted to do his own thing, to just do his own thing. Really care for the rules.
I think Saul was chosen mainly to show Israel how dumb they were.
Ed might have made a good point. For those that didn't hear, and Ed, I'm gonna grab your words. Saul was chosen just to show how dumb the people were for asking for a king when they had the king.
And use him for an example.
And example, learn from this. Yeah. I think, I think we can just roll right on it, Janet. I think we're going to maybe get a little bit more, but Ed, I'm going to go with yours. I'm going to go with yours. Chapter 10, verse 1, Samuel anoints Saul as Israel's first king. Saul was now the leader of God's people. Israel, verse 1 says his inheritance. But at this point, only God, Samuel, and Saul really knew about this plan that God had for Saul. You know, I think as Samuel is talking to Saul, even though there's a lot of discussion and a lot of things without the background, you know, Saul's got to be wondering about now, and this is my thing. This is not scripturally. What am I getting into? What is this God? What is this Jehovah? What does he have in mind for me? Well, that's why Samuel spends a tremendous amount of time talking to the grooming him, spiritually grooming him for the task that's in front of him. But there's some signs that come along the way, and we're going to see these as we get on into chapter 10. This first sign is in chapter 10, verse 2. Saul is going to meet two men that would tell him that his donkeys, in fact, had been found. Now your father is concerned about you. Don't you think that's a little funny that the father, once the donkeys are found, now he starts worrying about his son? That's probably just the way some of us fathers look at things like that. But the first thing that God tries to tell Saul through Samuel is that he's going to solve all of his problems. I'm going to get your donkeys back. I'm going to throw your father's attention on concern for you. So God's telling him just little things. He says, hey, I'm going to take care of you. Wiersbe's book kind of interjects right about now. He said that Saul had another major problem. His own inability to take his hands off the situation and let God work. In modern language, Saul was a control freak. A control freak. Any of us besides me have a problem with being a control freak? Yes, Ellen. Oh, you're acknowledging the fact. Yeah, we kind of, instead of just kind of stepping back and saying, God, you got this. I know you got this. God would give him the donkeys. God would allow his father to focus on him. Second thing is in verses 3 and 4. You're going to find that 3 pilgrims are heading to Bethel to worship God. They have with them 3 young goats. That's probably for sacrifices. And they have 3 loaves of bread and a skin of wine, probably gifts for the Levites there in Bethel. Then they're going to give Saul 2 of those 3 loaves. Verse 4, which Samuel tells Saul, which you will accept from them. So it kind of makes you think like there's a bit of humility with Saul, because he said, no, Samuel tells him, go ahead and accept. Well, Samuel in God's trying to tell Saul another hint. Hey, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide for your physical needs. The third sign, verse 5, is going to have to do with his spiritual power, because Saul is going to meet a prophesying procession of prophets. I'm going to say that again. A prophesying procession of prophets returning from worship. In verse 6, Samuel tells Saul, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. So the third message, God's going to give him the power. God's going to give him the strength to be able to fulfill his mission, to be able to do what God wants him to. Sad to say, not too much later on, Saul becomes self-sufficient, even to the point of being rebellious. And God's going to take his spirit from him. Chapter 16 and chapter 28. I'm going to go back on verse 6 just a little bit. God gave him a promise with the Spirit. You will be changed into a different person. Isn't that what happens to us when we truly allow the Spirit to work in our lives? Aren't we changed into different people? We use, and we allow the Spirit to work. We become different people. That was kind of a challenge to me, to make sure that we continue with God's Spirit in our life, that we continue to be different, set apart from this crazy world that we live in. We've got a mission. We've got a call. Verse 7, once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Verse 8, there's more grooming, more discussion, more instruction Samuel gives Saul at Gilgal. Then Saul starts his journey home. Verse 9, as Saul turns to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. And all these signs were fulfilled that day. What happens when God changes our heart? What happens when God changes?
You want to do what he wants you to do.
Yeah, you're more focused. You're more earnest about obedience and obeying what God wants you to do.
You have a clear conscience and obedience. You're like, you're pleasing God.
Yeah, you want to please God. Your conscience, Mary said, conscience is clear. You have a different outlook on life. You even put a smile on your face when sometimes there's not a whole lot to smile about. Your attitude is different.
We have to work on that because we're supposed to be joyful, gracious, and, being in the Lord and doing things for the Lord. We have to be with Him.
In marriage, just like Saul, that's an ongoing process for me because I kind of cycle the same way Saul did, because we're going to see that it's not too long that Saul kind of drifts back. He becomes more secular than he does spiritual. But verse 10, the Spirit of God comes powerfully upon him, like it said. He joins the other prophets in prophesying. And then what do his friends do? His friends continue to be critical of Saul, the change that Saul's going through, this newfound power. Verse 11, they even ask him, what is this? Almost to say, what is this? You're a prophet now? And then they reminded him, hey, Saul, you're just the son of Kish. Good friends, huh? They're really good friends. Saul returns home, goes back to the farm as though nothing happens. He does talk to his uncle about both the donkeys and about Samuel, but he says nothing to his uncle, his family, about being anointed as king. So, yeah, there's a bit of humbleness. There's a bit of Saul kind of being cautious, if you will, and not wanting to get out there and start communicating something before he's got a good feel for it himself. Verse 17, Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah. So they go back to Mizpah. He's called the nation of Israel back to Mizpah. I looked into this. This is it's a hill near Hebron that's about 500 foot tall. So he's bringing everybody to this 500 foot tall hill. He calls them together to present them their new king. He first recounts the redemption from Egypt by God's grace. He reminds them of their sins for demanding a king. And then Saul has the tribes gathered. He divides them by lot, by clan, by family, by individual. And this individual, this lot, falls on Saul, their new king. But immediately there's a problem. Verse 22 in chapter 10. Saul inquired of the Lord, has this man come here yet? The Lord answered, yes, he's hidden among the supplies. Now, is Saul being fearful or is Saul being humble? Is Saul being fearful? He's hiding out in the wagons, out amongst the supplies. Is he being fearful or is he being humble? I ran across a definition of humility that Andrew Murray, he's a preacher, missionary in South Africa, that's about the best definition of humility. He says, true humility isn't thinking meaningly of oneself. It's simply not thinking of one's self at all. It's not thinking meaningly of yourself. You just don't think about yourself at all. That's a pretty good definition of humility for me. Well, we think that Saul was probably more fearful. In fact, Wearsby says Saul was a reluctant ruler who followed his emotions instead of following the Lord. One day he's sacrificing. He's a courageous soldier. The next, he's a self-centered autocrat. Well, Saul was found, brought out among the people, and he was about a head taller than anybody else, so he kind of stood out. Verse 23, and then Samuel tries to make the best of this very embarrassing situation. Verse 24, Samuel said to all the people, "Did you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king. Long live the king." The people got what they wanted. Saul kind of did a little explanation to the people. Verse 25, the rights and duties of kingship. They were written down in a scroll, given to the priests for safekeeping. And then the people were sent home. They were dismissed from Mizpah. Verse 26 says that Saul went home accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. One of the commentaries that I looked at said that these men were men who feared God and regarded allegiance to their king, to their new king, as a conscientious duty. So that's a good friend to have. But he's still plagued. Verse 27, he's still plagued with these scoundrels, calls them scoundrels again, just like Eli's two sons were called scoundrels. Again, I just looked across the page in my commentary, and it says that these people were not scoundrels or just scoundrels. They were children of Baal. That's children of Satan, children of the devil. Because they said, how can this fellow save us? And then Saul shows some of his integrity. He shows some of those things, Janet, that I think that God saw. He's just being blasted, if you will, by these scoundrels. But Saul kept silent. Just kind of just biting. Isn't that the smart thing to do sometimes when you're kind of getting beat up? It's just kind of choose to be silent. And Cindy, remind me of that. That's hard. That's hard for some of us to do, especially when we're kind of getting attacked. Chapter 10. What did you learn and how do we apply it? Saul's life. Just anointed as king. What did we learn and how do we apply it?
He had a good start.
Saul had an excellent start. Krista, he just couldn't hold on.
I think he felt a bit overwhelmed.
Oh, would you? I mean, this is a guy that God's told him, now going back to the farm, but I've got bigger, better things. I mean, a farmer all the way up to the king of the nation, but he had God with him. That's the difference. That's the big lesson for me, that whatever mission that we're called on, whatever we're asked to do, whatever, God's Spirit, He's given us His Spirit, and He's going to be with us. He's going to help us get through.
As the going high, represented to the Israelites, the people, but he went high when he was found. It seemed to me that, was he embarrassed about being the tallest? And showing up? Why not?
I think, Mary, that Ed, kind of like you said, I think he was a little bit fearful. He didn't know what he was getting into. And God, working through Samuel, tried to reassure him. And then the people even said, hey, this is our long live the king. But overwhelmed, I think the word that Ed used had to have been
God
Overwhelmed.
works in mysterious ways.
Oh, Francis. Francis said, God works in mysterious ways. Amen. And amen.
Well, it takes all of us to teach the gospel of God. To carry on. I want to know how. Oh, that's God for help.
That ought to be an ongoing daily prayer is, God, I need your help. I can't do this. I can't do this life that you've given me by myself. Ephesians 6:10, my favorite verse. Finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Cynthia.
I was just thinking, and this kind of goes back to chapter 9, that God has a plan for us too. I mean, Saul was not aware of his plan, but God was watching and looking, and he was directing where Saul needed to be at the right time. And I think that happens with us too. We're not always aware of how God's working in our life. But also, Saul received the Spirit, and we have a Spirit, and whatever God has planned for us, I mean, we can relate to that. Whatever God has planned for us, with his Spirit, we can accomplish what he wants us to do with his plan.
Because I've looked out, I get a pretty broad view, and I see you guys nodding your head. I see you guys nod whenever, because whatever Saul goes through is kind of what we go through. But God changes us. God changes our hearts. He can give us courage. He can give us strength. He does in each one of our lives. Let's move on into chapter 11. One of the reasons Israel asked for a king was to unite them, united under one king, one leader, maybe more of a military leader, thinking that this would give them a better chance when they had to face their enemies. God did give them a king, Janet, and he kind of looked like a natural warrior. He stood strong, handsome, stood a head above everyone else. But they chose to give their attention to an earthly king rather than Jehovah God, who had just proved himself. And God doesn't have to prove himself, but he had proved over and over and over again that he was going to take care of it. But they still wanted a king. Well, we're going to see today, chapter 11, that Saul has an opportunity to prove himself, kind of consolidate his authority. Chapter 11, verse 1, Nahash, the Ammonite, went up and besieged Jabesh, Gilead. You know, the Ammonites were descendants of Abraham's nephew, Lot, Genesis 19, which meant that they were directly related to the people they were going to attack. That just tells you how volatile situation things were in Israel at that time. Nahash means, and he was that Ammonite leader, it means snake or serpent. Wouldn't you like to have a name that meant snake or serpent? He's encamped around Jabesh Gilead. Now we're some 50 miles from Saul's home in Gibeah. And the Ammonites they liked to go to war. They were warlike people. But this time, instead of attacking, long siege, potentially costly siege, they chose to try to negotiate a treaty with Jabesh Gilead. They said, if you'll agree to be humiliated and crippled, we'll let you live. Let's just read verse 2. And of course, this is Nahash talking. I will make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you and so bring disgrace on Israel. I'll let you go. I'll let you off the hook, but I'm going to gouge out the right eye of everybody in Jabesh Gilead. They would be marked physically as defeated prisoners of war. Nahash would automatically subdue the city, take its wealth, enslave the people, this bringing disgrace to all of Israel. And the leaders there in Jabesh Gilead, they said, can you give us a week? Before you attack, can you give us a week? We're going to send out a plea for help. And then Nahash, he is so proud. He's got a pride problem too. Says these weak, ununified, disjointed tribes, they're not going to respond. So he says, go ahead and take a week. Go out and cry out for help. So messengers from Jabesh Gilead were sent out, and they tell Nahash, verse 3, if no one comes, if we don't get people to come and rescue us, we will surrender. You can gouge out our right eye. Messengers were sent out to Gibeah. People started crying. Saul is returning from the field, and he goes, what's going on? Why are people crying? Verse 5. And then they tell Saul about Nahash and Jabesh Gilead. Then God takes control. This when all else seems like it's just God takes control. Verse 6. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger. Anger, this powerful emotion. Is it ever good? Is anger ever good? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Ephesians tells us that we're not to sin by getting angry, and we sure don't want to walk around angry all day and let the sun go down on our anger, but anger can be a very strong, positive emotion. We can use that.
Jesus was angry.
When you drove the money changer out of the courtyard, when people were doing stuff that they knew they weren't supposed to do. My NIV footnotes. Anger directed at sin. Anger directed at sin and against mistreatment of others is not wrong. In fact, it can motivate us to do the right thing. I think that was your point. That makes anger good when we're motivated to do the right thing. In fact, we ought to be concerned sometimes if we're not angry.
The Lord says, be angry, but do not sin. So it makes you think.
And Mary, you don't want to get into a sinful situation, but sometimes when the things that go on around us in our world, we need to be angry. And anger, that anger should motivate us to try to do something to make that right.
And anger was the first two boys in Genesis, the firstborn males that Cain killed Abel on jealousy, and that was anger and hatred. And that's what it's an example. What would happen if you had anger? Anger
has been with us for a long time. It's how we use it, and that's the difference. It's how we use it. Because Sam's right. You know, Jesus himself, when he saw God being abused with all these things in the courtyard, he drove them out, drove those money changers out. Well, this was a call to battle for Saul. He musters an army somewhat forcefully. Chapter 11, verse 7. He took a pair of oxen. Saul took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messenger throughout Israel, proclaiming, This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel. Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came together as one. Okay, now if donkeys, if farmers needed donkeys, and they were the pickup trucks, what were oxen?
Tractors.
Tractors, that's what I wrote down. They gotta be, Saul was saying, if you don't come and help me, bringing that to today's time, I'm gonna tear up your tractors. That's a pretty graphic, pretty stern warning. Well, they respond to Saul and Samuel. In fact, 330,000 men. I am always overwhelmed Israel is a little small country, but yet 330,000 men respond. In fact, Saul sends a message back. Tomorrow, we're going to come and rescue you. To Jabesh Gilead, that's under siege, that are waiting this week to get a message back. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back and rescue you. Then the elders of Jabesh Gilead are pretty shrewd. They tell Nahash what? Verse 9. Tomorrow, we will surrender. I mean, that's verse 10. So Samuel is saying, verse 9, hey, I'm going to rescue you tomorrow. And the elders are telling this Ammonite war king that, hey, we're going to surrender to you tomorrow. So it takes takes Nahash a little bit off guard. Their army kind of lets down their guard. He kind of has a sense of false confidence, because Saul, he divides his army into three parts, attacks at night, and the Ammonites are caught by surprise and completely routed. But it was God that gave them the victory. It was God that gave them the victory. Saul had authority from God. Now he had stature before the people. In stature, just right out of Webster's, reputation gained by ability or achievement. So Janet, we think that Saul had some natural military talent. He could muster people together. He had to threaten them first, but he could bring people together. And then he had some natural talents as a military leader. It takes both stature and authority to be an effective leader. And then Saul shows a little bit of his wisdom. This wisdom that he's gaining as he's finding out more about his roles, as he's finding out more about this Jehovah God and this spirit that works in him. Verse 12 and 13. The people said to Samuel, who was it that asked, shall Saul reign over us? Remember these scoundrels that were saying, shall Saul reign? Take these men, turn them over to us so that we may put them to death. But Saul says, no one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel. It was a time to unite, to make this victory over these Ammonites something that could bring the people together. We're going to unite. We're going to celebrate. We're not going to make a time to get evil. Verse 15. So all the people went to Gilgal and made Saul king in the presence of the Lord. I think a lot of good lessons for us today. We will take up next week with the next few chapters, 12 and 13. Enjoy the class. Enjoy your comments today. Thank you.